This was the most highly requested helmet, and therefore the one that I have created. What's up, guys? Today is day one of making whatever clone trooper helmet my followers tell me to make. You see, a few weeks back I made a post on Instagram asking my followers of all the clone helmets in the Clone Wars, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, which clone trooper helmet they'd like to see me make. On that post I received over 200 comments, but the comment that was liked the most was Phase 2 ARC Trooper 5s. So in this video, I'm going to go over in detail how I made ARC Trooper 5's Phase 2 helmet. I start off by 3D printing this helmet on my Elegoo Neptune 3 Max. If you don't know how to slice 3D files and print them on your printer, go check out my other tutorials that will go over that in detail. But after printing out the helmet, next comes the fun part where I'm going to remove all the extra plastic and brim that's still attached to the pieces I need. When printing, this extra plastic is essential for supporting the print so that it doesn't collapse on itself and so that it adheres to the plate. So it's essential and a waste of plastic, unfortunately, but now I'm going to go through with some special tools and I'm going to remove all that extra plastic so I have just the helmet and the attachments I need for the helmet. These are the tools that I use to remove that extra plastic, and as you can see, the extra brim and supports that were once attached to these pieces are now gone. So that's super important because the next step will be sanding, and we can't sand the surface of the helmet with that extra plastic attached. So as you can see, there are multiple spots where we're going to need to smooth it down. There are layer lines from the print, and that's just natural. That happens with 3D printing, especially FDM printing. So we're going to knock those down to make it look a little bit better. Now comes one of the most important steps, is getting a good sand on the helmet. Right now I'm using 120 grit sandpaper on my mouse palm sander, which helps me get into the little cracks and crevices and reach more of the surface area. So as you can see, a lot of those initial layer lines that you guys saw before are knocked down. It's not perfect, but this next step will help address all those remaining imperfections. And that next step is using some kind of filler. Bondo Spot Putty is a popular choice, but I'm using Liquitex modeling paste. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it with a little bit of water, just enough so I can brush it. And before I brush that on, I'm going to take some of the modeling paste itself and just use my fingers to press it into the areas where it needs a little bit more filling. Once I have all those major areas, I'm going to take the cup with the water and modeling paste that's already been mixed, and I'm going to use an old brush and brush it over the entire helmet in light coats. Once you cover the helmet entirely, you're going to let it dry. During these steps, I actually use a heat gun to dry it out and accelerate the process, but I do it about 4 to 5 times so I can get a nice layer of modeling paste over the helmet. Since this modeling paste is water soluble, I'm going to encase all my work with some filler primer. I use Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer, and I'm just going to coat the entire helmet with a thick layer of this stuff. It's going to expose the new ridges and the layer lines that I have missed with the modeling paste, and it'll help me identify what areas need more attention. And after the filler primer has fully dried, I repeat these steps until the helmet is smooth to my liking. So after the primer is dried, I'm going to sand it back down with 120 grit sandpaper, and then use filler again, and then work my way up to 220. And then ideally have a smooth finish that's ready for a base coat. After all the attachment and the helmet are smooth to my liking, I'm then going to apply a base coat. I use black on all the attachments, and I cover the helmet itself with a satin white base coat. It is very important that I let the helmet sit for 24 to 48 hours to let that base coat completely cure, because the next step will be masking the design. For the masking process, I use a couple of different tapes. Frog tape is the primary tape, and I'm going to use that for all the sharp lines and edges that I need for the design. The next tape that I use is just cheap painter's tape, and that's just going to cover the rest of the helmet where I don't have to worry about having smooth, crisp lines. frog tape recommends that once it's laid and you've sprayed a color over, that you peel it while the paint is still wet and not fully cured, and that will help give you the best results. So I use the cheap painter's tape and a plastic bag to cover up the rest, just so overspray doesn't get on the helmet. And this part is actually one of the most important parts. After taping, I'm not going to immediately use the blue spray paint. I'm actually going to use the same white that I used for the base coat. And I'm just going to lay a thin layer over the edges where the tape is. This is going to create a seal that will give me some smooth, crisp lines with very little paint bleeding through. So make sure to spray that on in some light coats and make sure it fully dries before you lay the next colors over. So very important step. This will help you get some very clean lines. After that white paint is dried, next I'm going to lay some gray around the back side of the helmet and lay the blue. That's going to be the majority of the design for the Fives helmet. Once again, these are all spray rattle cans. The blue is actually a royal blue from Ace Hardware. So if you live in the States and want to replicate the color that I used, royal blue from Ace Hardware is what I used. So it worked well for the 501st color, and I just used a gray for the back part. I enjoy giving my helmet some battle damage, so I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm going to wad it up into a ball. With that little ball of tape, I'm going to go press it along the edges and the parts of the blue, roll it around a bit, and this will pull up some of the paint, making it look chipped and worn as if it was worn in battle. This also gives the paint some texture, so when we go and weather the helmet with some acrylic paint later, the paint will get stuck in those little crevices and indents that I've created, adding to the effect of it being worn and battle damaged. I let it sit for a few more minutes, but like I said before, I'm going to want to pull up the frog tape before it's fully cured for the best results. I wear gloves and am careful not to smear any of the blue paint on the rest of the helmet, but as you can see here, there was no bleeding and the lines turned out pretty clean. So thanks to the frog tape and spraying that initial coat of white, the lines are looking pretty good. Next, I'm going to whip out some cheap acrylic paints and some old brushes, as I'm going to be doing most of the weathering and detailing by hand. But before we can get to the weathering, I need to do one final thing. I need to glue on the attachments because those parts need to be weathered as well. So we have a few aerators and an earpiece, and I'm going to use a special glue with some accelerator that will make it cure pretty quickly. So I'm going to apply that generously and attach those pieces so that I can weather the helmet. As Anakin Skywalker says, this is where the fun begins, because this is when we're going to use acrylic paint mixed with water to weather the helmet. As you can see here, I dab in that mixture into the crevices and low places, and then I simply take a paper towel and I'm going to dab it and wipe it off, and the remaining bit of acrylic will just sit in those areas and look like it's accumulated dirt over time. So it gives the helmet more dimension, and I personally like this method. It's really cheap, so I do it for all my helmets. Once the entire helmet is weathered, then I'll go in by hand and paint the band, the teeth, and the rest of the helmet that needs the little detailing. The reason I do this after the weathering is because I don't want to smear or erase any of these parts that need to be solid colors. and I finish it off by adding the red markings on the top. So the helmet does look pretty good, and like we said before, that is acrylic paint, and acrylic paint can be removed quite easily with water. So we don't want that to happen, so I'm going to apply a thick coat of this acrylic clear coat. And I go with matte because I like the way it looks, especially with this helmet. It goes along with the Clone Wars look. So I apply a clear coat so that all my work is now protected. And just like the base coat, we're going to want that to sit for at least 24 hours so it can fully cure. But after that is fully cured, we can then install the visor. And I like to go with the Hobart welding face shield. It gives off the black lens effect. It's reflective. Those wearing the helmet can still see through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace out a little template of the visor and where it's going to go. And I'm going to take that template and simply trim out the section of the Hobart face shield that I need. Once I've double checked and make sure that it's trimmed to my liking and that it will cover the entirety of the opening in the helmet, next I will use the hot glue gun, and while holding the visor with one hand, I'm just going to run it along the edges so that it will harden and secure the visor inside. I'm very generous with the amount of glue that I use because I want the visor to be secure. But once the visor is in, that essentially concludes the process of finishing the helmet. So all I have to do is attach the rangefinder and the helmet is done.
And there it is. Phase 2 ARC Trooper 5s.
At this point in time, I can test on the helmet and add padding if I like. I don't in this case, but as you can see, the files here allow for a functional rangefinder, which is actually pretty cool.
And there you have it. There's the ARC Trooper 5's Phase 2 helmet that I 3D printed and finished on my own. This is the first video in a series where I'll be making whatever Clone Trooper helmet you guys tell me to make. The voting will go as follows. I'll be posting on Instagram and YouTube. Go ahead and comment whatever Clone Trooper design you want to see me make. Like other comments that other people have made of Clone Trooper designs that you'd also like to see me make. I will then go and select the top comments on either Instagram or YouTube, and I will create that helmet, and that will be the next video in the series. Comment whatever Clone Trooper helmet you want to see me make, and I will go ahead and make it. And if you're wanting to make a helmet like this on your own, you can go to Galactic Armory, use my code 3DELPRINT for 10% off, and get yourself the files for the Phase 2 ARC helmet or any other helmet that you guys want to make. Galactic Armory is a great place to go. They have a lot of different options, so make sure to go check them out, and don't forget to use my code 3DELPRINT.
And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like this video if you want to see more content like this. Comment what helmet you want to see me make next, and subscribe so you don't miss out on seeing day 2 where I'm going to make another helmet from scratch. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.